This is the Born to Be podcast, where we believe you were created on purpose and for a purpose. Each week, we deliver inspiration and interviews with today's top thought leaders who are living out their unique calling every single day. Are you ready to discover your true identity and become who you were born to be? The future is yet to be created. And now, here's your host, Darren Earlywine.
Welcome back to the Born to Be podcast, and excited about our guest on this episode. We're going to feature a handful of episodes here in the next coming months that are going to focus in on radio theology and the Born to Be podcast, our partnership with ActivateIndy, which is I guess we call it a movement that is being started by Thrivent Financial here in town, gathering together 9 nonprofits that are doing amazing work in the city of Indianapolis. And we're going to meet their founders. We're going to meet some of their key volunteers and get to know the story, that what brought them to really see that this is who God created them to be. Understand that God's purpose and His passion for their life, and how that's actually making a major difference here in the city of Indianapolis. If you listen to the podcast and you're outside of the city of Indianapolis, some of these organizations may actually have branches in your city. But if they don't, I hope these interviews inspire you by the stories of people who have really given their life to servanthood, given their life to actually make a difference in a compassionate way in their city. And I hope it'll inspire you to take some of those steps yourself. And so the first episode we're going to jump into is with an interview with Danny Marquez. Danny is the director and leader of an amazing ministry here in Indianapolis called Youth for Christ. They actually work in the near west side, and he's the near west side city life director. And they get a chance to do a lot of great things in the Indy area. His story is going to inspire you. And so I'm stoked to welcome Danny Marquez to the Born to Be podcast. What's up, Danny?
Hey, what's going on, Indianapolis?
Yeah. So, Danny, I'm going to guess that you were not born in Indianapolis.
That is correct. I was actually born and raised in New York City.
New York City.
In the Bronx, New York.
Okay.
And, I experienced a lot of crazy stuff out there, and eventually came to make Indianapolis my home.
Yeah. So I was in New York City last year. My family went there, and we spent like 3 days just seeing everything in New York City, and a couple of the burbs, and what just struck me, and I want to hear from your perspective growing up, is what after a week of being there, one thing that was kind of crazy to me is I thought about, man, if you're a kid and you grew up in Manhattan or you grew up in the Bronx, like you didn't grow up seeing a lot of grass. Like that sounds simple, like stupid, but I mean. It's called the concrete, jungle for a reason, right?
Exactly.
So what's that like growing up in the Bronx?
That is so interesting because I came to Indianapolis, and I quickly discovered that I was allergic to grass. I had never pushed a lawnmower before or anything like that because it is, like you said, the concrete jungle. So when I came out here and I started mowing the grass in front of my house and so forth, I kind of just was like, something's happening with me, and I couldn't breathe. I was allergic, just a lot of allergies.
Yeah.
You know the process
yeah.
there, and getting hives and all kinds of stuff. And so, yeah, just never had an opportunity to push a lawnmower, and so therefore I kind of like just discovered that I had a problem with grass.
Yeah, your body was like, what is this substance?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Danny, I think what's interesting is you're obviously a long way from home. You discover things like I'm allergic to grass, but somebody that's listening right now is that, they may be in a place and trying to figure out, finding who was I born to be. You know what I mean? We believe on the Born to Be podcast that God creates everyone on purpose and for a purpose. But the journey of discovering that, I mean, it can take you from the Bronx all the way to plop you down in the city of Indianapolis, which I guess take us on that journey a little bit. Because, I mean, I'm guessing it's there's some pretty cool turns along the way as God's been guiding and directing you.
Yeah, so I really didn't know my purpose until a few years ago, and so part of my story is that I was abandoned as a child. I was literally left at a doorstep. My mom ended up in Norway. My dad, he died of AIDS. He was a drug user, didn't know any of them, and so I grew up in a home that wasn't my own. Grew up in the Bronx, New York, and just kind of like adapted to the life that was informed by the city, and so because I was in a home that wasn't my own, I kind of felt just rejected in so many ways. I had this void in my heart. So eventually I embraced the streets, and I learned the code of the streets, and I've made a lot of bad decisions there. And A long story short, I eventually went on just a robbery spree, and I was facing 45 years of my life in prison.
Wow.
And while I'm sitting in my cell, I'll never forget, I was in Nassau County Correctional Facility. And while I was in my cell, a memory came to my mind of a person that I robbed. It was, a moment that, just happened. And, I put the gun to his face. I demanded his money. And he resisted, so unfortunately I pistol whipped him, and blood is gushing everywhere. And the guy, he steps back and he looks me square in the eye, and he says, "May God bless you." And that man chose to forgive me right then and there. And I was so blown away by his words, not at the moment, but while I was facing all this time, while I was sitting in a cell reflecting on my behavior, that memory came to my mind and just revolutionized my heart. And I remember getting off of my knees after just recognizing my need to cry out to the God that my mom tried to teach me about growing up. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. And you would ask, so how is it that you're facing 45 years, you're wrapped around cold steel, and you feel free? I learned that freedom has nothing to do with where you find yourself physically or geographically. It's an issue of the heart. And the Bible talks about who the Son sets free is free indeed. And I know today that day, while I was in that cell, I was made free. And so, some days go by after that experience, that encounter with God. And I ended up transferring from the main building of Nassau County Correctional Facility to the satellite unit. And when I was there, this real enthusiastic Christian, he comes to my cell and notices a Bible sitting on my desk in the cell. And he asked me, "Hey, do you read the Bible?" And he's just kind of weird to me. I'm still kind of in my old kind of state of mind and everything, but I did have a Bible. It was one of those Gideon Bibles that chaplain gave it to me when I came in. And, he asked me if I wanted to be a part of a Bible study. And I said, yeah. Actually, I didn't say yeah to begin with. I wanted to observe and see what that was like and so forth. So I kind of went down and seen it. They had it every day at 8 o'clock in the evening. And so I finally participated. And when I participated, I realized that this is something that I want to do. I want to start to figure out and explore what God means for me and for my future.
So before that, Danny, because I thank you for sharing your story. I'm enamored by it, just so intrigued because it's so different from my experience, and I think it's so key for us to take every opportunity we can to get to see life through the lens of someone else's story. You know what I mean, and begin to understand, our own lack of perspective, I guess, a lot of times in life. And so for you growing up, living in a home that wasn't your own, having that sense of feeling rejected, like, did you have any imagination as a kid for what your life could become? And did God or spiritual matters at all intersect in that?
No. I had very little resources or very little connections to people that can help me think about those things or introduce me to those ideas. My mom, she was an incredible woman of faith, so I seen faith in action through her life. She would attempt to bring me to church, but the church that she was going to was a little bit too much for what I was ready for. It was an independent Pentecostal, and there was a lot of just stuff that I seen that wasn't registering well with who I was. Yeah. And so, actually there was a lot of hypocrisy. There was a lot of, modern day Pharisee kind of attitudes. And I thought to myself that if that is what Christianity is, I actually don't want any part of it. And so, those were the faith intersections in my life where my mom would occasionally bring me to church, or rather she would force me to go to church often. And then eventually I would be like, I don't want no part of this. And so, I think about the 40 developmental assets. And if, or if you're aware of it, it's a study that the Search Institute had put together, and it basically speaks to some internal and external assets that one receives during the course of their life that allows for them to be either successful or be a deficit in their community. And I took that test myself, and I scored about a 7.
Out of 40?
Out of 40. And it was interesting because I realized that I was just at a place in my life where I didn't have people or resources in my life to help me get to the place where I can start to think about having a different life. So I was more, for me, in survival mode than thinking about my future. And that's the case with a lot of the kids that we're working with today. Yeah. They're more into survival mode than they are into thinking about college or thinking about, the payments that they're going to make on a house or a car and so forth.
Yeah. So for you, then you find yourself transfer that facility, joining this Bible study. So is that a part where you begin kind of discovering a new version of Christianity, or was it maybe, okay, there's a guy, Jesus, here that's intriguing, may not have something to do with what I saw in church. Talk about that process.
Yeah. So when I first started, just to be a part, or even considering becoming a Christian and working on changing my lifestyle, it was honestly because I wanted to show my mom that I'm tired of the lifestyle that I was living. And she had poured into me to the best of her ability. And, I'd done nothing but cause her pain and caused her, just sorrow because of, what seemed to be a failure. She did her very best. So I did that initially to say, you know what, Mom, I want to do this for you, And I remember, I'll never forget one time I made a phone call home. And I'm like, Mom, guess what? I'm a Christian. And you know what she says? She says, really? Well, do that when you come home. And I kind of felt like that was she didn't mean to, say it in a way that will make me feel rejected. But I kind of, at that moment, was like, what? And I realized then that this journey was not going to be based on something that I'm doing for somebody or, it's going to be a personal journey. And at that moment, I said, God, it's me and you. And I never forget. I said, God, if you're real, I need you to speak to me. And one day I was in Rikers Island. I come out of my cell. I get on my knees and I open up the Bible. And I said that thing, God, if you're real, I need you to speak to my life. And I landed on a verse in Ephesians chapter 4 where it says, those of you who stole, steal no more, but rather work with your hands so you could give to those who have need. Now, that verse is not a relevant verse for a lot of people, but for me, it became a life verse because most of my life from a very early age, from the age of 5 years old, I started stealing, and that's all I knew. It was almost a spirit that was over me that even when I had money through, pharmaceutical work, the street hustle,
creative underground economies.
Yeah, exactly. Even when I had money, I would still go into stores and I would steal and I would, steal from people. And it was a problem for me. So when I came across that verse, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that God was speaking into my life, that he was speaking to my heart.
What I love about that, Danny, is that, a lot of people, aren't going to have your exact set of circumstances. But what I hear from a lot of people is this feeling of like, man, I don't know if God speaks to me. I don't know if, how he'll speak to me. Maybe I'm not the kind of person or I'm not good enough or whatever it may be. But to see in your story that it's like, I don't care if you're a suburban mom or you're, an athlete or, you're a teenage kid or you're a guy that's literally in Rikers Island, like God can speak to you and not in a generic way, but in your situation. I mean, leading you to a scripture to say, listen, this applies exactly to your unique story and set of circumstances.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, man. So what's that journey look like? So you start this journey, God has begin speaking to you, but I'm guessing if you're looking at 47 years, it wasn't like all of a sudden snap your fingers and everything's perfect and it's great. I'm sure there's a journey there.
Yeah, there definitely was a journey. And so it was a journey of learning what God meant for my life. And so, the more I read the Bible, the more I prayed and got around people, that loved Jesus, they began to pour into my life. And I started to see life from a whole different perspective. And I had a problem with cussing. I went into prison with a 4th grade reading level. And so, I lacked vocabulary. I couldn't communicate. And so consequently, I would respond negatively to people that I thought were treating me like I was stupid or dumb. And so I would respond negatively to that. And so I had to learn how to reprogram my mind, how to think differently about, how I'm going to respond to a situation. And so, for example, I would hear people say, just crazy, vomiting vulgarities and all these kinds of things. And I would say, how can I say that differently? And so in my mind, I would begin to say it differently in a way that communicates truth, but also communicates in a way that is effective communication versus welcoming a fight.
Wow.
And so I had to think about those things, think differently about how I was navigating. I had to commit to saying, God, I trust that your Holy Spirit is working in and through my life at this moment, even as a spiritual toddler. So I'm going to trust that all kinds of things are just going to start to, you're going to clean me. So I gave up smoking cigarettes. I gave up stealing. And, people steal all the time in jail and prison. I gave up lying. I gave up all these kinds of things. And it was an intentional decision because I knew that I wanted change and I couldn't keep doing the same things and expecting a difference in my life. And so there was a personal kind of like a conscious decision to say, I'm no longer going to do this. But I also know that it was the empowering of the Holy Spirit that allowed me to do those things.
So you don't seem like you're 47 years old right now. So I'm guessing you didn't stay at Rikers for 47 years.
Yeah.
So how long was that process?
So I was facing 45 years and it was 15 years for each case. And I did 12 years sentence. They sentenced me to 12 years. And of that 12-year sentence, I did 10 years and 8 months. Yeah. And so...
So a decade behind bars. And I'm guessing you're growing there in this time. You're seeing God work in your life. But maybe take me back. Was there a moment towards the end of the sentence or whatever? Because I'm guessing if as God's beginning to change you, were you beginning to get a new imagination, a new vision for life? Because I'm guessing that, that last year had to be somewhat terrifying. Like, this is what I've known for a decade. Like, I know that God's been at work in my life. I know I've seen a change, but where do I go from here? Take us back to those moments.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I was probably about 3 years left in my bid, and that seems like a lot to a lot of people. But after having already done 7 years, 3 years are right around the corner.
Sure.
Right? And so I'm like, God, I'm about ready to go home, and I'm okay with spending the rest of my life in prison because I'm free. And I said, God, if you want me to go home, I need a clear mission and a clear vision for what you would have me to do. And I'll never forget, during time in prayer and fasting, the Lord spoke right into my spirit. And he said, I want you to go back into the same kind of communities that you once helped destroy, and I want you to start to rebuild them. And I just knew that he was speaking to my life. Confirmation from other people and from the word itself. I think about when Paul was on his way to Damascus. He encounters Jesus, and Jesus knocks him off of his high horse, and he's finally able to look up and he says, Lord, Lord. And Jesus essentially tells him to go back and build what he was trying to destroy up in Damascus, which was the church. And I knew that he was speaking to my life. And that for me became, when I knew he was speaking that into my life, I just began to dream up, how can I make this a reality? And so the Lord gave me a vision for a grassroots kind of effort called Engine Initiative. Engine is an acronym for engaging next generations in neighborhoods everywhere. Eventually I came home, and we meaning me, my family, and some pretty cool volunteers got together, and we started doing work in the community. And, through that work, Youth for Christ learned about some of the stuff that we were doing. My good friend, Rick Weaver, he came and he was like, dude, you need to get down with Youth for Christ. And I'm like, never heard of Youth for Christ. My most of my life was just hood, street, that kind of thing. And so didn't know that Billy Graham was the first paid staff on YFC. And so just clueless. And so started learning a little bit more. And I realized that Youth for Christ was totally in line with where God has me in life.
Danny, what I love is one thing we talk about often here on the Born to Be podcast, and it's one of the sessions that we have in our spiritual DNA workshop. Is actually called Passion and Pain. Mm-hmm. And we encourage people to go back and do a life mapping exercise and looking at some of the most painful moments of their life, and helping them see that God wastes nothing, mm-hmm. and that a lot of times He will use the greatest moments of pain as a crucible to develop passion in them, because when you we talk about all the time that the Latin root word for passion is passeo, which means suffering. Mm-hmm. And when you have suffered through something, you are willing to suffer for something. That's right. on the back end of it. And so I love that part of your story. I just want to go back to the moment though when you felt like God said, hey, this is what I want you to do. What did that feel like to have that moment to realize like there is a purpose? This will not be wasted. What did that feel like for you?
It felt freeing.
Yeah.
It felt like I had a mission. It felt like through that mission, I found purpose. And so it felt great. It felt like, I'm ready. God, I heard your voice clearly. I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
Let's do this. And here, this is an individual who is, when you talk about traditional education, I barely got my GED. I remember I said I went into the prison with a 4th grade reading level, and within about 6 to 10 months, I ended up getting my GED, but I did not pass by flying colors. I may have passed by about 5 points. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is coming from a person that doesn't have any educational background. I got a little bit of college because of my time in the prison and that kind of thing. But, sometimes there's times that I honestly just feel thoroughly inadequate in so many different places because of where I came from and that kind of thing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because it keeps me humble. It keeps me at a place where I'm just depending on the Lord and trusting on the Lord. And not only that, but more importantly, when I get to work with teens that are living the kind of life that I was leading, and me being who God has made me today, it gives me the opportunity to say, dude, I could totally relate. This is where I was.
Yeah.
And look, I'm living among you right now. You could do this.
Yeah.
If I could get a job having done, this amount of time in prison, what's your excuse? I get to say that to them and push them toward, thinking differently about life, that they don't have to be stuck in a system of poverty or, what me and my executive director call the spirit of poverty, is stuck in that cycle, So I get to pour into them and show them that life, you can live a great life right here in the hood.
Yeah.
Find the beauty out of the ashes that, we often find in the hood.
So let's talk about that, Danny. I love it. There's no doubt that every day you wake up, there's got to be so much passion filled in what you're doing because of the journey you've gone, of your story. And so talk to us about what you guys are doing with Youth for Christ right here in Indianapolis.
So City Life is one of the core ministries of Central Indiana Youth for Christ. And it's the core ministry that allows us to step into inner city communities, impoverished communities, low education, or, kids that are dropping out from school and, just homes that are unhealthy, dysfunctional. I mean, what home is not dysfunctional, right? But, you see it to a high degree in some of the inner city neighborhoods. So we get to connect with these teens, and when we, and how do we connect with them? Like, I'll find them on a basketball court, or if they're, hanging out on the corner or wherever they are, I show up. And this may seem strange to you, but I'm just built this way. I'll approach them wherever they are, in the store, gas station, wherever they are. And I'm like, yo, what's up? You remember me? And they'd be like, no. I'm like, I don't remember you either. My name is Danny. How you doing? And I just start the conversation. And, some of them look at me like I'm weird, or some of them just laugh and engage the conversation. And I get to give them a flyer. Listen, this is what we're doing. We got club on Thursday nights. We do, camps and all kinds of different things to help produce indigenous leaders. That means that they get to live here and lead where they live. And so, it's a lot of fun to be able to do that. I think about the partners that are connected to Youth for Christ. And in fact, more so, the other core ministries that help make change in the city possible, such as Parent Life. I'm in partnership with Nicole Wilkes. She's a colleague and fellow staff member, and we get to do life together. She focuses on spending time with teen moms and dads and pouring into their life in so many different ways. We have City Life Wheels, where Nate Hershey is training kids how to work on cars and, gain some, vocational training so that they can step into the workforce and start making good money at doing something that they've learned through the ministry. We also have Campus Life, where people, more in the suburban areas, they go into the schools, on the staff, they go into the schools, spend quality time with the students, just reflecting Jesus and pointing them to Jesus, the students. And then we have JJM, Juvenile Justice Ministries, which focuses on going into the prisons and spending time with the teens, preparing them for their release into city life and occasional transition into city life programming. So I don't know if I messed that up. So they transition into the streets, and sometimes they go right into the city life programming.
Yeah. Danny, has there been a kid, or I'm sure there's been a handful of them in all the work you've done, has there been a kid where you feel like you were looking in the eyes of Danny Marquez when he was 12, 13, 14, where you've been able to see, that God sends you to interact in some ways, become, Christ is a savior, but, really stepping into a kid's life. Have you had moments like that you can tell?
Absolutely. I mean, my go-to story is always, usually around a young man named Dustin. Dustin, I love Dustin a lot, and I often speak about him because I'm doing life with him on a regular basis. The Lord has allowed us to have such a tight-knit relationship, but he had a problem with his dad. His dad had been deported to Germany, and he felt abandoned completely, and he just didn't know how to process that. He was bitter in his heart because of, just his dad having left him, and he didn't know how to process that. So him and we were able to relate because he raps and I rap too. So we put together, bars and that kind of thing. And so through our conversations, I learned about his issue with dad. And I'm like, man, dude, I could totally relate to that, man. And I began to share my story. In fact, I shared a story about my experience with my mom. After 29 years, my wife ended up finding, I think it was 29, maybe 27, I forget. My wife ended up finding my mom online.
Your birth mom?
Yep, my biological mom. And
it was in Norway, right?
Yeah, who was in Norway. Yep, she found her in Florida.
Wow.
And so, I shared the story with him one time, when we connected over the phone, she wanted to visit me while I was incarcerated. And she came, and I'm sharing the story with him, and I'm like, dude, she came, and I'm looking her face to face in the eye. And she's, crying, and she's like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. She's coming up with all these different reasons on why this happened and so forth. And I'm like, Mom, I forgive you. And she said, but I don't understand. How can you forgive me? And I said, Mom, if you knew what I have been forgiven of, you will understand why I'm able to forgive you. I love you, and I'm prepared to be a son to you, and I'm prepared to honor you as my mom. And I shared that with Dustin, and I remember him kind of like shedding tears. He was crying, and I'm like, dude, you have a stepdad at home that's loving you. You may not recognize it, but he loves you. Yeah. And even then, he was just so kind of like hard-hearted against life and just all that was associated with his dad having left. Today, he honors his stepdad, and he loves them. And just recently, I noticed a Facebook post saying, "I love my stepdad." Wow. He took that initiative, and I, shared with him, "Man, I'm so proud to see your growth in this area."
Yeah. And Danny, I love what you're doing, your passion, but I'm guessing you got to have a great team around you of ministry leaders, of volunteers that come around to make a difference. Talk about what it looks like to be a part of what you guys are doing with City Life.
Yeah, so thank you for asking me about the team, because that's a question actually that a lot of people don't ask me about. They tend to focus on the work that I'm doing personally in the community, but none of the work that I'm able to do is possible without an amazing team of ministry leaders. And again, I shared this a little bit earlier, but we don't call them volunteers. We know that is like the known name for people that come in and do work kind of like for free, if you would. But no, we call them ministry leaders because they're called to a higher calling. It's not this idea of just putting away chairs at the end of an event or wiping up some food stains on a table. No, it's a life-on-life journey with teens. And we have about right now for this near West Side, we have about 17 to 20 leaders that are active in our ministry and that are spending time with teens, coming to our clubs, joining in a program that we've recently put together called the Alpha Youth Series. And so it's been incredible to watch adult leaders have a desire to be a part of a ministry that is pouring into the life of young people, and coming in as learners. Coming as not as I got this figured out, so I want to fix this kid, but saying I want to learn this student's story. Yeah. And I tell you what, when they learn the kid's story, their lives are changed, and it's incredible to watch. And so, I get to, just engage ministry leaders who desire to see a real change happen in the life of young people, and it's just been incredible to see.
Yeah. What if somebody wants to get involved and they say, you know what, maybe their story is not exactly like yours. Maybe it's somewhat similar. Maybe they've never thought they could make a difference, that they could give back to their community. Yeah. Or maybe their story is completely different, but they're saying, listen, I want to make a difference. I want to get involved. How does somebody get involved in what you guys are doing with Youth of Christ and City Life?
Yeah, so one of the first ways that I recommend is, come to some of our programming, see what we got going on. If this is in fact something that you feel like the Lord is calling you to it, I encourage you to go on to CIYFC.org and go to the volunteer tab and start the process. Once you go through that process, we connect you with local students, and you get to pour into their life. And we offer training in so many different ways, and equip you to get involved.
What's the website again, Danny? Say it again.
It's called CIYFC.org.
CIYFC.org.
And you go to the volunteer tab and you start the process from there.
Do you guys have a Facebook site, page or anything like that people can check that out as well?
Yeah, so we have the Central Indiana Youth for Christ Facebook page. We also have the Facebook page for the Near West Side. And I often emphasize the Near West Side because we have somebody on the Near East Side. So City Life plants itself in some of the worst neighborhoods of any given city, right? And so we have Rick Weaver, who is the City Life director on the Near East Side. We have Antonio Payton, who is currently working on fundraising so that he can come on full time in the 42nd and Post area. We're planting ourselves in the focus areas throughout the city that Indianapolis has declared, public safety has declared as high crime, high poverty, high dropout rates among teens, and so forth. And so So I often emphasize, the Near West because that's where I do ministry. Yeah. But I want to, just make sure that I'm emphasizing also that I'm only one of many people that are helping to make an impact here in this city. Yeah,
I love it.
And so that Facebook page for the Near West is City Life Indianapolis-Near West.
Near West. I love it. And easy way for you to get connected, not only to Danny, but to all the partners that we're going to focus on in the ActivateIndy movement this year here in Indianapolis is just go to ActivateIndy.com. And there's ways to get connected to any of the partners that we focus in on. And Danny, I mean, I didn't know, I knew little bits and pieces of your story. It's an absolute honor to meet you, inspired by what God has done in and through your life and what you're doing here in the city. And, as you're listening, I just want you to, I know you're already inspired as you've listened to this episode. And I don't care what your story is. You may say, you know what, like I've never even been to the Bronx, or I've got, my story doesn't even compare to where Danny's at. But you may still be at a place where you feel like God couldn't use you, or God doesn't have a plan for your life. But I hope that you're inspired and understand that it doesn't matter where your process has taken you, where your journey is taking you to this point. Is there's hope, because God has created you on purpose and for a purpose, and it's just a beautiful thing. And Danny, man, I can't say thanks enough for being on the program today.
Thanks for the invite. It's truly my pleasure. I wanted to say something on that note. Something that you had mentioned is that often I hear, especially the older folk, they say, I don't know that I can be a part of this kind of thing because I don't know that I'm cool enough, or that I can be relevant enough for the kids and that kind of thing. And I often smile at that, and I'm like, guys, if you only knew, all you need to bring to the table is love. If you bring love and transparency, these kids are going to adore you, and they're going to want you to be present in their life. In fact, make no mistake about it, they desire adult leaders to be in their lives. I took a survey recently. 30 students came to our club that night. 27 of the 30 said they absolutely want an adult leader in their life. So I encourage anybody that is feeling inspired or touched by what City Life and Youth for Christ is doing here in the city. We need you. We've been praying that the Lord would send more laborers into the harvest, for the harvest. And so
I love it. So you don't have to be cool. You just have to be available, and you are an answer to prayer. You can make a difference in our city. Go check it out at ActivateIndy.com. You can get connected to Danny, everything they're doing. And, man, thank you so much. Danny Marquez from Youth for Christ, City Life. And we'll catch you in the next episode of the Born to Be podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Born to Be podcast. We'd love to hear from you. If you've got a question for Pastor Darren, a suggestion for a future guest, or if the podcast has made an impact in your life, get in touch with us at blackbirdmission.com. And if no one else tells you today, you are made on purpose and for a purpose. God is near to you, not far from you, and God is for you, not against you. Have a great week.